Hi, my name is Charlotte, and this channel is about my attempt to become moderately competent at drawing. So last time I talked about 4 areas that I'm focusing on at the beginning of 2023. Portrait drawing, figure drawing, learning to use digital tools for drawing and painting, and finally, learning to increase my visual library. And I'd actually like to talk about the visual library part of it today. So every day I like to spend about an hour just drawing various different topics. So rhinoceroses, squirrels, dogs, houses, telephones, whatever sort of occurs to me to draw at any given time. And the reason to do this is first of all so that you develop a greater vocabulary of things that you can draw without having to look at reference. But the other reason to do it is to really cement a process of how do you approach drawing a new and unfamiliar subject. So I've never actually drawn a rhinoceros, but I'm starting to find a process by which I can look at a reference of a rhinoceros, break it down, and figure out how could I draw that in a way that makes it look mostly rhinoceros-like. So in order to tell the story of where I'm up to, I do have to again go back to the beginning of learning to draw. So back in 2015, my first exposure to drawing was using this book, You Can Learn to Draw in 30 Days by Mark Kistler. And I mentioned this last week. It's actually quite a nice foundational book in the sense that it introduces a lot of fundamental ideas like perspective and shading and cross contours. And it does so in a very fun and easy to use way, as befits the fact that it's really intended for quite a young audience. And from there, I studied the book Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. And then after that, I kind of ran into trouble. And about a year later, I went back to drawing, and at that point, I picked up some additional books. Some of these have titles like Drawing for the Absolute and Utter Beginner, and I tried Keys to Drawing by Bert Dobbs, which is very widely recommended to beginners. And I picked up a book in a charity shop called Learn to Draw What You See, and various other books of this type. But nothing really grabbed me. So then as time went on, I kept thinking, oh, one day I'll go back to learning to draw. And eventually this really happened in the middle of 2020. And as we all know, 2020 was a time when everybody was trying out new hobbies. And I thought at that time, I'll just start drawing. Like, forget all this learning to draw, I'll just start drawing. So I got a little sketchbook out of a drawer of my desk, and I started to sketch small houses. So I drew a whole bunch of little houses, and as I kept drawing them, and I really enjoyed doing this, I went back to the idea of, well, what if I learned to draw properly? Like, I could not just draw these little houses from reference, I could also start drawing all kinds of other things. So I Googled something like best way to learn to draw 2020, and the thing that kept coming up was a website called Drawbox. So whereas most of the books that I had been looking at come from a fine art tradition, Drawbox actually comes from a different type of drawing. So the originators of this type of drawing came from product development, visual development, and even architectural sketching. And this appealed to me a lot because really early in the fine arts style books, people start talking about gesture and tone and mood, and it's like it becomes a little bit ambiguous for the absolute novice, and particularly if you're a fairly literal-minded novice, as I am, whereas Drawbox, which has this slightly more technical approach, felt a bit easier to use and a bit more kind of obvious. So the early stages of Drawbox are very, very low level. It's like drawing a line, drawing different lengths of line, then you move on to drawing circles and drawing ellipses, and you get a lot of practice producing pages and pages of simple shapes and lines. And this was really useful to me because this was something that I had completely lacked, and it's not something any of those earlier books had emphasized. And you move on from that to drawing in perspective, and then ultimately into Drawbox's probably its most famous exercise, which is drawing 250 boxes in 3-point perspective. And that was a grind, I'm not gonna lie. It took me, I think, 19 days. You can definitely do it faster, but I felt like that was a reasonable amount of time each day spent just drawing 3-point perspective boxes. And I learned so much from doing that. I really changed my confidence level in my line quality, in my boxes, in how I understood 3-point perspective. It was a really valuable thing to do. But boy, was it boring. It was really boring. At that point, you move on to what the program calls constructive drawings, which is where you use the methodologies you've learned of starting from simple shapes and volumes, and then you attempt to draw actual subjects. And the first example of that is plants. And I started this with high hopes, but very quickly lost enthusiasm and impetus. And a little bit of that is that the early stages of the program were well taught for what they were. But as soon as we got onto things like plants and insects, things that had bothered me a little bit about the teaching method started to bother me a lot more, and I was having less and less fun from it. Now, the program says itself, you shouldn't expect to have fun doing this program. It's about learning these difficult skills. But I think I was so far removed from any enjoyment of it that I just didn't feel like I wanted to continue. At the time, I kind of set it aside and thought, maybe I'll come back to it. And in the meantime, I went back to a more fine arts approach. And for this, I used a program on Skillshare, which is called The Art and Science of Drawing. This is a hugely popular class on Skillshare. It's had thousands of students, and it is very, very good at what it does. You start with mark making, you do shapes and forms and volumes, cross contours, and so forth. I have two pieces of art from this section, one from the end of the first shading module and the second from the second shading module. And the first was this elephant. I will say this elephant, I started drawing it on paper, on very bad quality paper. And I got about 90% of the way through and realized the paper was not going to hold up to any more shading or any more kind of fine detail or erasing. So I scanned it in and finished it off digitally. And I did the same with the second of my two subjects, which was this pumpkin. And it too, I finished off digitally after doing the majority of the work on not very good paper, because apparently I just don't learn when it comes to paper quality. I was really happy with these when I produced them. I still think that for the level that I was at that moment in time in the end of summer 2020, these were pretty good. So after that, things kind of lapsed for a while, and a lot of that had to do with things going on in the rest of my life. In the interim, I did a lot of drawings of trees at this point for some reason. I was really keen on drawing trees. So my next big class was a return to dynamic sketching. One of the people who teaches this, who's kind of been around the longest, is a guy called Peter Han. He wrote a book called The Dynamic Bible, and he runs classes independently, kind of as a freelance teacher. And I joined his class in August 2021. There are two ways to join this class. You can join as a full student, where you pay, at the time that I was doing this, around $800. And that gives you access to all the classes and the Discord server. But then probably most importantly, every week Peter sets assignments, you complete them, and he will then give extensive personal feedback at the end of every session on last week's work. And it was very clear to me that he was giving feedback that people were finding very effective, in the sense that he would talk through what somebody had done, he would draw over their work and show them how they could have done it differently. And then the next week, you would often see them having implemented his suggestions and really moved their drawings on. Unfortunately, there's just no way I could afford $800. So I did the lower priced option, which was, at the time that I did it, was $150, something in that range. And that was for what he calls a sit-in seat. You can join the classes, you can ask questions during class and he'll answer, but you don't submit your work and you don't get any personalized feedback. The thing that I found most valuable was that even though I wasn't getting any feedback myself, I could still watch all of his feedback and remarks to other students. And because the range of abilities in the class was quite diverse, it was really great to be able to see not only what he told students who were probably at a similar level to me, but also what he told less experienced students and students whose work was much better than mine. And I did feel like that process that he was trying to teach, of how do you look at a subject you've never drawn before and figure out how to draw it, really helped me. So since then, 2022 was quite a mixed bag in terms of the time that I spent drawing and also what topics I covered. I tended to jump around the topics a lot, and I'm not sure that that's always been hugely beneficial to me, but on the other hand, I also really didn't get that bored with my time spent just drawing. In a way, I'm looking for this to be the least regimented of all my 4 topic areas. I'd like this to be the one where I can jump around, I can draw a lot of different things. I can spend one day drawing houses and spend the next drawing rhinoceroses. And that's because I'm putting a lot of structure into the rest of my learning process. I like to have something where I'm just exploring lots of different topics. So when I come back to this in about a month with the results of what I've done in January, I'm hoping to show you like different topic areas that I've explored. And I know that one of the first ones I want to do is birds. So next week I am going to do the last of my videos about my starting points. And that's going to be first of all about my digital drawing and painting skills. And because I really haven't done very much of this yet, that's going to be very brief. And then I'm also going to be talking about my figure drawing experiences to date and where I'm going to be starting from in 2023. And so if you've enjoyed this video, I hope you'll join me on this journey to becoming moderately competent, and that you'll like and subscribe and do all the YouTube things. Bye for now.